Russia's war is illegal. It is violating the rules on war crimes, on crimes against humanity, on the attacks on civilians, on schools and hospitals. It is simply abhorrent behavior that defies the rule of law and undermines the rules-based international system of civilized behavior. So Canada is a staunch supporter of Ukraine and of the Western coalition.
How big an issue is this in Canada? Because we're seeing across the world pretty staunch support for Ukraine, and lots of predictions of that support wavering hasn't necessarily come true. What's the position in Canada and for Trudeau? How staunch can he be?
Very, very strong. This is an issue that crosses all political party lines. There has been Ukrainian emigration to Canada for more than 130 years. 1.4 million Canadians. That's 4% of our national population. 1.4 million Canadians trace their heritage to Ukraine. It's the second largest Ukrainian diaspora in the world. So what happens in Ukraine truly matters in Canada. And that, of course, is in addition to all of the very compelling foreign policy reasons why we would be supportive. Russia's war is illegal. It is violating the rules on war crimes, on crimes against humanity, on the attacks on civilians, on schools and hospitals. It is simply abhorrent behavior that defies the rule of law and undermines the rules-based international system of civilized behavior. So Canada is a staunch supporter of Ukraine and of the Western coalition that has been amazingly strong for this past year. There were serious questions about whether it could stick together, and it has in spades.
And how far is it willing to go in terms of supporting Ukraine militarily? I mean, because that's the question that everyone seems to be asking. That there's lots of talk about fighter jets, but it's clear that we can't provide them in this country for what appears to be years. It doesn't appear that they're going to get anything directly from certain countries. How all in is Canada willing to go?
Well, our contributions so far have totaled over $5 billion in this past year, and relative to the size of our economy and our population, that puts us in the category of major supporters. We have contributed military equipment, military training, military supplies. The training has been critical. Canadians have been in Ukraine training the Ukrainian military forces for about 7 years, a very long time. And that was a material reason why when Russia invaded, they were surprised at the vigor and the competence and the skill of Ukraine's military. That's because countries like Canada have been training that military for years in advance. That training, of course, now continues at bases in the UK and other locations across Europe. But in addition to our military activity, including 4 more Leopard tanks that were announced this past weekend, as well as other military supplies and additional sanctions, there's humanitarian support, there's economic support, there's support for refugees that are looking for places to go. Canada has been very welcoming to Ukrainian refugees, and practical things too. Russia has attacked Ukraine's food supply and food production systems, blowing up silos of grain and in effect holding the hungry parts of the world to ransom by cutting off the flow of food supplies from Ukraine. Canada has been very staunchly in support of the Black Sea Grain Initiative, and we've contributed, I believe it's about $50 million to technically help Ukraine improve its ability to store grain when they can't get it out. At least store it properly so that it doesn't rot or get lost to the elements. So on all of those fronts, Canada is a vigorous supporter, and we will be. The Prime Minister and all others in the Canadian government have said as long as it takes.
This is why story's on the front of the Times today, because there's an interesting Canadian angle to it. Shamima Begum should be allowed to come home, says a terror watchdog. It's a big controversy in this country, as you'll be aware of. Actually, before you were a diplomat, you were in government. You were the Canadian Minister for Public Safety at the time that Shamima Begum entered Syria. And there is an allegation that it was with the help of a Canadian spy. The idea that there was a sort of secret agent working for Canadian intelligence who took people into ISIS-controlled Syria, a double agent really, and was involved in bringing Shamima Begum to Syria. How true is that? How much is Canada responsible for getting her out of England and into Syria?
Well, all of that actually took place before Prime Minister Trudeau's government was elected. So I wasn't the minister at the time. I became the minister later on. The current minister has ordered a review of exactly what happened. And we have in Canada very strong review legislation. It's broad, it's government-wide, it's not siloed for one department or one agency. It's a government-wide national security and intelligence review agency. And they will undoubtedly conduct their examination and make their report in due course.
But
the fundamental principle is an agency like CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, has to comply with Canadian law. There are no exceptions.
But if you're a spy and your job is to try and investigate what's going on, you will commit acts undercover, no doubt, in order to bolster your credibility. And therefore, it's not implausible that in doing that important job, there might be collateral damage, like you're involved in the removal of Shamima Begum from the UK.
The Canadian law is very specific about what can and what cannot be done by agents who are exercising the so-called royal prerogative in defense of the security of the nation. A number of years ago, we codified that so that it wasn't left to vague interpretation. Okay. It's laid out specifically. You can do this. You cannot do that. Okay. And that is what the review process that the minister has ordered will examine.
Would Canada take back people like Shamima Begum? What's the Canadian position on that?
We have been working at this for the last 3 or 4 years in terms of those individuals who are stranded over there. They some of them went as fighters to join the most brutal terrorist organization since the Middle Ages. Some of them went as wives and children were born. So people are there for a variety of different reasons. In Canada, the position that's been evolved through government policy and by decisions of the courts is that the women and children should, to the extent practically possible, be removed. Now that is easier to say than it is to do. You're operating in an absolutely dysfunctional part of the world. It's hard to tell sometimes when you're consulting with an official, do they have the authority to actually be consulted and to take the decisions you're asking of them. But we are working on at the moment, I believe it's 19 cases of women and children. There are 4 other cases involving men who were actually fighters at the time. Those issues are still before the courts, and it will remain to be seen what their status is. But with respect to women and children, Canada is in the process of trying, as well as we can, to bring them back to Canada if they are Canadian citizens. Then arises the question, what happens when they get back home? And obviously, if there's any basis upon which to launch criminal proceedings, those criminal proceedings will be taken.
And if you like that,
you can listen to us.
We're Stig and Asthma. Have you forgotten?
Well done. Every Monday to Thursday on Times Radio Breakfast.